Hello class, good evening. Welcome everyone to our today's lesson on animal husbandry unit. And before we start our lesson, here I like to take some attendance, and I will download the attendance from Google Meet. Download attendance, and I can see 5 members have joined the class, and I'll just take that attendance. So now I've taken the attendance. So today, our lesson, we are going to discuss about laboratory animals, a brief introduction to those laboratory animals under the introduction of animal husbandry, and the objectives of today's lesson. We are going to look at what are some of those common laboratory animals under this introduction to laboratory animals, and also we shall see which are some of the importance of those laboratory animals or their uses as they are reared within the controlled environment, the laboratory, and also we shall see which are some of the advantages that we could prefer using those small animals as laboratory animals. But before we start discussing our objectives of today's lesson, I like us we have a recap of what we discussed in our previous lesson, where we looked about the general view of animal husbandry, and we said in those general view of animal husbandry we were to discuss about animals which are kept in laboratories for specifically for the purpose of scientific research and any other related activities for those research purposes. So, and now today we want now to see which are some of those common laboratory animals and what are their importance as they are kept in those laboratories, and why do they prefer those small animals. And we say those laboratory animals, they are used for experimental and biomedical research. So which means that those laboratory animals, they should be handled carefully and also taken care for the purpose of obtaining the correct results during experimentation and manipulation of those laboratory animals. So the common laboratory animals, we have examples of those common laboratory animals where some of them you know them, like the rats, we have the hamsters, we have the rabbits, we have also the mice. Now when we talk of those animals, remember we have those which we call those laboratory animals, and we have those which we call wild animals. So we don't prefer those wild animals. So we prefer those which are kept in the laboratory. A good example, as you can see in those slides, a good example of those common laboratory animals we have like the rat, where we use a specific species, like the species which we call ratus, and also we have another species we call Rattus novagaricus. So it is a specific example of those rats which are preferred for laboratory activities. We have also another example like the mice, a specific species which we call Mus muscularis, and also we have the hamsters. The scientific name of the specific name is Mesocritus outratus, and also we have the guinea pigs. And specific name we have is Caphias of Ceras, and also we have lastly the rapids as an example of those common laboratory animals, where we have the species we use is Ornithorus concurrens. Now, as you can see in the next slide, we have the diagrams of the pictures of those laboratory animals, so you can see their color, how they look like we have those rats, their color. You find they are blended with black and white. We have the mice, they are purely white, and the rabbits, we have those which are white. The hamsters, some of them you find they are brown, and even the guinea pigs. So they have different colors based on their species. So, but those are the common structures of those laboratory animals. So whenever you see them, you can be able to distinguish one animal from another, and you can see they are much different from those which are wild animals, as much as they are in the same family. So these laboratory animals, as you have seen them, good examples of those, they have different uses. So one of the uses of those laboratory animals, or the purpose, is for research. Now when we talk of research, when you are doing maybe the research of genetics, in other words, you want to compare the genes, the behaviors, how those animals they behave, especially in socialization, in their feeding mode. You talk of reproduction, you talk of their growth, their anatomy, in other words, their structure, physical appearance, the morphologies, all those they are classified under research and biological use. We have also another use is toxicology testing. Now when we talk of toxicology testing, we use those laboratory animals to test the toxicity of chemicals. Now before those chemical substances they are introduced maybe for consumption foods, especially the preservatives, before they are passed for use for human consumption, they must be tested by the help of those laboratory animals, whether they will be used or safe to use or not, depending on the symptoms which will occur in those laboratory animals. And we have, they can be used for diagnostic work. When we talk of diagnostic work, is for detection of diseases. So they can be used for diagnosis. So you take the sample of those specimens collected, they are injected with those laboratory animals. The symptoms and the behaviors which they produce determines the type of disease which that specimen or the pathogen which it contains. And also they can be used for bioassay testing. When we talk of bioassay testing, is now when you come up with a drug or a vaccine, before it is administered to those higher animals, it must be pre-tested in those laboratory animals. Like for example, if you come up with a COVID vaccine, you come up with the HIV vaccine. Now before they are used to those human beings and other animals, you do testing to those laboratory animals, because the symptoms and the reactions which they produce against those drugs will be the same as for those now which they are going to use in the industry for human beings. And lastly, another purpose of these laboratory animals is for teaching purpose. Now when we talk about teaching purpose, they are mostly used for educational institutions where students or learners, they are using those laboratory animals to study, maybe for example for dissection procedures. So they want to do dissection procedures and examine the structure of different organs of those laboratory animals, which are now similar to higher animals when they study the anatomy and the physiology of either human beings or other animals. So those are the common uses of laboratory animals. We have also you can see in our common examples of those laboratory, most of them they are small in size. So there is some advantages of the reasons why we prefer small sized animals for the laboratory animals to be used as laboratory animals. So one of the advantages is that they are easy to handle. When they are in small in size, you can handle them easily without being harmed in any way. And also another advantage they have is that they can be easily bred in the laboratory, so for reproduction, producing more of those another species of another generation, they can easily be bred in the laboratory. And also another important is that they can be easily maintained. Now when we talk of maintaining, is they can be managed easily in a controlled environment, that is what we call the laboratory. And lastly, they can be some of them they use for, in other words, to attract the customers or to attract other people. So whenever they come, they see it, so it becomes so interesting in the laboratory, especially for first for shows or exhibitions. They can also, some of them, they can be used. So those are the common advantages which we prefer using those laboratory animals. So you can get much of the information of that introduction to those laboratory animals by considering those references which you can see there on your slides. At this moment, I want to give whoever has a question or any clarification to whatever we have studied under the laboratory animals. So since there is no anyone who has a question, so I like now to ask a question. Maybe you tell me which an example of any laboratory animals which we have done or we have studied in class. Yes, Samson.
So maybe another question.
Yes.
Maybe is it maybe about the animals which are supposed to carry out the experiments? Are they supposed to be a specific species?
Yeah, that's the way we said earlier. Those laboratory animals, they are specific species which are considered for those diagnostic work. So you cannot take all those general animals, but there are specific species which are preferred because with them they show observable features or reactions when you do those research. So that's why we are considering on the scientific name, the specific name. So for the specific laboratory animal, we consider specific species, not another species. That is why we said we don't consider those which are wild animals, especially if it is the rats. We don't use those rats which are found at homes. We don't use those which are found in the forest. We only use now those which are of specific species in the laboratory. If there is no any other question, we can end there our lesson today. But before we stop, I want to give you an assignment so you can see it below the last slide. You can see the assignment which I want you to do is now you give the difference between a mice and a rat. So they are the species of the family rodents, but they have specific differences, the mice and the rats, and you submit them in the online platform through the RMS system. Then I will do marking from that system. So since there is no another question or any clarification, we can stop there for today's lesson. Meet you next time. Goodbye.